Imagine standing in the center of downtown St. Louis, looking up at a $2.2 billion glass spire that is supposed to represent the pinnacle of Midwestern innovation. It's a beautiful day. The sun is reflecting off the polished steel, but as you stare at the top of the building, you feel a sense of vertigo. You rub your eyes, thinking it's just a trick of the light or the clouds moving behind the peak. But then you look at the sidewalk, and you see the yellow tape, you see the armed guards. You see the panicked city officials clutching blueprints. It's not an optical illusion. This structure, weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, is physically leaning into the sky. It is currently tilting at 5 degrees and counting, a measurement that in the world of structural engineering is essentially a slow-motion catastrophe. Just 48 hours ago, inspectors officially banned all entry, declaring the billion-dollar interior a total no-go zone. Today, we are going deep into the mechanical failure, the corporate negligence, and the geologic surprise that turned St. Louis's most expensive project into a $2.2 billion leaning tower of terror. When a building this size starts to tilt, it doesn't happen all at once. It's a rhythmic, agonizingly slow process. For the residents who spent millions on their condos, the first signs were subtle. It started with mysterious tapping sounds behind the walls at night. Then, the marble kitchen islands began to rebel. If you placed a grape or a pen on the counter, it would slowly, steadily roll toward the western corner of the unit. People joked about it at first, calling it the ghost of the tower. But the jokes stopped when the elevators started getting stuck. High-speed elevator systems are designed with incredibly tight tolerances. When a building tilts even a fraction of a degree, the elevator cables start to rub against the guide rails. The friction creates a screeching sound that echoes through the vents, and eventually, the safety sensors simply shut the whole system down. Within weeks of the first reports, half the building was taking the stairs, and that's when the city inspectors moved in with laser levels. What they found was a structural nightmare. The tower wasn't just settling, it was sinking unevenly into a layer of soft clay that everyone thought was solid bedrock. To understand how a $2.2 billion project misses something as basic as the ground it stands on, you have to look at the history of the St. Louis riverfront. For a century, this area was a hub of industrial activity. The ground was filled, moved, and built upon dozens of times. When the developers commissioned the initial soil surveys, the reports were allegedly optimized to show that the site was ready for a massive vertical load, but they didn't dig deep enough. Beneath the layers of historical rubble and limestone was an ancient, prehistoric pocket of silt and moisture. It was a geological trap, waiting for 1 billion pounds of pressure to trigger it. As soon as the tower reached its full height, the pressure became too much. The pocket of silt began to compress like a wet sponge. The problem is that it only happened on one side of the foundation. The eastern side of the tower is anchored to a solid shelf of rock, while the western side is floating on this subterranean jelly. This created a pivot point. Instead of the whole building sinking together, which would still be bad but potentially manageable, the building began to rotate. Every inch it sinks on the west side translates to a several-foot lean at the summit. At 5 degrees, the top of the tower is now nearly 50 feet out of alignment with its base. If you stand on the roof and drop a basketball, it wouldn't hit the sidewalk. It would hit the neighboring building across the street. The decision to ban all entry wasn't just a precaution, it was a necessity. When a building tilts 5 degrees, the plumbing stops working because the drainage pipes are no longer sloped correctly. The glass panels in the facade starts to pinch in their frames. If the pressure continues, those panels won't just crack, they will explode outward under the sheer force of the shifting steel. The city realized that the tower was essentially becoming a vertical cannon of glass and debris. They didn't just evacuate the building, they created a 4-block exclusion zone. Business owners who spent their life savings to be near the next big thing are now watching their investments vanish behind a chain-link fence. Now, let's talk about the money. Because that is where the lawsuits are starting to climb faster than the tilt. $2.2 billion is an astronomical sum for a city like St. Louis. Much of that money came from public bonds and tax incentives. The citizens of the city are, in a very real way, shareholders in this disaster. The developer, a multinational conglomerate with a history of avoiding accountability, has already begun the process of shifting assets into different shell companies. Their legal team is arguing that the unforeseen geological event qualifies as an act of nature, which would shield them from most liability. But the inspectors aren't buying it. They've uncovered internal memos showing that a junior engineer flagged the soil reports 2 years before the groundbreaking, only to be told to stay in his lane. This is a classic case of what we call project momentum. When you have a $2 billion machine moving forward, it takes an incredible amount of courage to be the one to say, "Stop, the dirt is wrong." There are too many contracts, too many political careers, and too much ego on the line. So everyone keeps their heads down and hopes for the best. They hope the concrete will be strong enough to bridge the gap. They hope the physics will somehow be more forgiving. But physics doesn't care about your quarterly earnings or your political legacy. Physics only cares about gravity and load distribution. And right now, gravity is winning the battle for St. Louis. The engineering challenge to fix this is almost as expensive as the original construction. They can't just push the building back. They have to perform a process called underpinning, which involves digging a series of new, much deeper tunnels under the leaning side of the foundation and filling them with high-density pressurized grout. It's like trying to perform heart surgery on a giant while he's still standing up. If they put too much pressure in one spot, they could trigger a sudden shift that would bring the whole thing down. Each day the building sits at 5 degrees. The internal stress on the steel skeleton grows. Steel is flexible, but it has a limit. Eventually, the molecules in the beams will begin to fail, and at that point, the building becomes a permanent hazard that can only be removed piece by piece. Imagine being one of the hundreds of employees who worked in that tower. You arrived at work on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, your desk, your computer, and your personal belongings were legally unreachable. People have left car keys, medicine, and irreplaceable family photos inside a structure they might never be allowed to enter again. The entry ban is absolute. The city has installed vibration sensors every 10 feet. If a single person walks across the lobby, the sensors detect the change in weight and sound an alarm. The building is being treated like a live explosive. As the months go by, the leaning spire of St. Louis has become a grim tourist attraction. People come from all over the state to take selfies with the tilting giant. But for the people who live in the shadow of the tower, it's not a joke. There is a constant, underlying anxiety. They know that if the tilt hits 7 or 8 degrees, the structural integrity moves from critical to terminal. The city is already preparing contingency plans for a controlled deconstruction, a process that would take 5 years and cost another $500 million. Who pays for that? The developer is already filing for a strategic bankruptcy. The insurance companies are pointing fingers at the architects. The architects are pointing at the soil testers. It is a carousel of blame that leaves the taxpayers holding the bag. What makes this specific failing megaproject so frustrating is that it was touted as the smartest building in America. It was supposed to have a self-healing concrete foundation and an AI-driven structural monitoring system. Well, the AI is working perfectly. It's the one that sent the alert to the inspectors telling them that the building was no longer safe. The irony is that the technology designed to save the building is the very thing that proved it was a failure. The smart building effectively called the police on its own developers. Inside the ban zone, the scene is haunting. Because the building tilted so quickly, the interior looks like a frozen moment in time. Coffee cups are still on desks. Monitors are still plugged in, though the power has been cut for safety. Because of the tilt, the water in the decorative fountains has pooled into one corner, stagnant and green. It is a 5-star ruin, a palace of glass that no one can use. And because the air conditioning is off, the Missouri humidity is starting to take its toll. Mold is blooming in the luxury carpets. The gold leaf ceilings are peeling. Even if they fix the tilt, the cost to remediate the interior damage is now estimated in the hundreds of millions. The geological surprise of the silt pocket has also triggered a massive review of other buildings in the area. Now every developer in St. Louis is terrified that their foundation might be sitting on a similar trap. The real estate market in the downtown core has essentially frozen. No one wants to buy an office or a condo near a building that might fall over. The tower hasn't just failed itself, it has poisoned the well for the entire city. It is a toxic asset in the most literal sense of the word. Let's look at the technical data for a second. A 5-degree lean might not sound like much when you're talking about a small object, but on a 600-foot tower, it's a delta of nearly 50 feet. That means the center of gravity has moved outside the central core of the building. The core is the thick concrete and steel spine where the elevators and stairs are located. It's the strongest part of the building. When the center of gravity moves outside that core, the weight starts to pull on the outer curtain walls. These walls are meant to hold the glass, not the weight of the building. We are currently seeing buckling in the steel mullions on the 20th floor. It looks like the metal is melting, but it's actually being crushed by a force it was never designed to handle. The city's legal team is trying to fast-track a public endangerment suit to seize the developer's remaining assets before they disappear. But in the world of high finance, money moves faster than law. By the time the suit reaches a judge, the $2.2 billion will have been laundered through a dozen different holding companies across 3 continents. This is the dark side of modern megaprojects. The profits are private, but the failures are public. When the building makes money, the developer takes it home. When the building tilts, the city has to figure out how to stop it from crushing the street. The engineering community is watching St. Louis with a mixture of fascination and horror. There hasn't been a tilt this significant in a modern high-rise in decades. Usually, these issues are caught when the tilt is at 0.5 degrees, not 5.0. The fact that it got this far suggests a total breakdown in the inspection process during the construction phase. Someone was signing off on these levels. Someone was looking at the laser data and saying, "Close enough." We are likely looking at a massive corruption scandal that will emerge once the subpoenas start flying. As the vibration sensors continue to tick and the tilt meter slowly moves toward 5.1, the neighborhood remains in a state of suspended animation. Business owners in the red zone are begging for permission to at least enter their shops to retrieve their inventory, but the city won't budge. The risk of a sudden settlement event, the engineering term for a catastrophic drop, is too high. If that silt pocket collapses completely, the building won't slowly lean. It will drop 10 feet in a second. The resulting shockwave would be like a localized earthquake. What does the future hold for the $2.2 billion ghost? There are 3 scenarios. Scenario 1 is the miracle cure. They spend $500 million on a massive underpinning project and manage to level the building. This would be a world-first success. But even then, would you want to live in a building that once tilted 5 degrees? The stigma would be permanent. Scenario 2 is controlled demolition. They take the building down floor by floor. This is the safest but most expensive option. Scenario 3 is the permanent monument. They stabilize it just enough so it doesn't fall, but it remains empty forever. A giant, glass warning sign in the middle of the city. The human element of this story is what really hits home. We talk about the billions, but think about the young couples who bought starter condos on the lower floors. Think about the tech startups that moved their entire operations into the penthouse, believing they were part of a new era for St. Louis. Their dreams are literally leaning into the wind. They are stuck in a legal limbo where they still have to pay their mortgages on a property they are biologically banned from entering. It is a financial trap of incredible proportions. As the sun sets over the Mississippi, the shadow of the leaning tower stretches across the city, appearing longer and more distorted than it should. It is a visual reminder of the distortion of the truth that allowed this project to happen. It is a monument to the idea that you can buy everything except the cooperation of the earth itself. The $2.2 billion spent on glass and steel couldn't buy a single foot of stable ground. The inspectors who issued the entry ban are being called heroes by some and villains by others. The pro-developer lobby wants the ban lifted to allow for repairs, but the inspectors know that if they let workers in and the building shifts, those workers will never come out. They are holding the line against a massive amount of political pressure. Behind the scenes, the mayor is reportedly being bombarded with calls from investors demanding that the building be recertified as safe, but you can't recertify a 5-degree lean. You can't lobby your way out of a geological collapse. The tilting tower has also become a case study in university classrooms. Engineering students are being shown the reports and the laser scans as a warning. It's a lesson in the importance of ethics over economics. It shows that no matter how advanced your software is, if your input data, the soil density, the load weight is flawed, your output will be a disaster. The tower is a physical manifestation of a GIGO error, garbage in, garbage out. In this case, the garbage was the soil report, and the out is a $2.2 billion liability. St. Louis has a long history of resilience, from the Great Fire to the transformation of the riverfront. But this is a different kind of challenge. This isn't a natural disaster that happened to the city. It's a disaster that the city allowed to be built. The debate over how much the local government should have known is raging in the local newspapers. Some say the building permits were rushed through as part of a downtown revitalization act that bypassed several layers of geological scrutiny. If that's true, the city isn't just a victim, it's an accomplice. As we look at the building today, we see the gold leaf peeling and the glass catching the light at an odd angle. It is a heartbreaking sight for anyone who loves architecture. It was supposed to be a masterpiece. It featured a double helix staircase in the lobby and a levitating garden that was supposed to use magnets to stay suspended. All of those cutting-edge features are now just debris inside a banned zone. The magnets have been turned off. The garden has crashed to the floor. The double helix staircase is warped and twisted. The story of the St. Louis Tower is a story of our time. It is a story of what happens when we prioritize the spire over the subsurface. We want the glory of the heights without doing the dirty work of the depths. We spend billions on what people can see and pennies on what they can't. And eventually, the part that no one sees, the dirt, the silt, the prehistoric clay, reminds us that it is the most important part of the entire equation. The entry ban remains in place indefinitely. The armed guards stay at their posts. The sensors continue to monitor the silent, shifting weight of $2 billion in glass and steel. Every time a heavy truck drives by, the sensors spike. Every time there is a heavy rain, the tilt increases by a fraction of a millimeter. The tower is a living thing, and right now, it is a very sick one. We will continue to follow this story as the legal war intensifies. Will they find the smoking gun email that proves the developers knew? Will they find a way to save the skyscraper? Or will the people of St. Louis wake up one day to a massive, controlled implosion that clears the skyline but leaves a $2 billion hole in the budget? Whatever happens, the Leaning Tower has already changed the city forever. It has transformed the vista of downtown into a question mark. As we conclude this deep dive, remember that every city skyline is a story of ambition. Usually those stories are about success. But the stories of failure, like this one, are the ones that actually teach us how to build a better future. They remind us of the cost of cutting corners and the price of ignoring the earth. The St. Louis Tower is a tall, shiny, leaning teacher, and the lesson it's giving is one of the most expensive in human history. The 5 degrees and counting isn't just a measurement of a building. It's a measurement of a systemic failure. It's a tilt in our priorities, a lean in our ethics, and a collapse in our oversight. And until we fix those internal foundations, we will continue to see gold-tinted spires that can't stand up to the truth of the ground they occupy. The sun goes down, and the skyscraper is left in the dark. No lights shine from its windows. No people walk its halls. It is a $2.2 billion ghost, standing at an angle, waiting for its fate. And the city around it waits in silence, hoping that tomorrow, the tilt meter doesn't move another inch. It is a high-stakes waiting game where the prize is the safety of a city, and the cost of the loss is almost beyond calculation. Keep an eye on that spire. Because in the world of mega projects, things are rarely as stable as they look. And in St. Louis, the most expensive building in the city is also the most fragile one. 5 degrees. That's all it took to turn a dream into a disaster. And the counting hasn't stopped yet. Keep watching, and stay safe out there.